Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know that the world is celebrating tonight with all types of fireworks. It's only right that we come back in suit. I'd like to be able to touch upon tonight something that growing up as a young boy meant all the world to me. In elementary school, I went to a yeshiva known as Tiferet Elimelech. Tiferet Elimelech. Tiferet Elimelech at that time was by far one of the best yeshivot, elementary school, and my father wanted to try always to get his kids into the best yeshivot. And we were very lucky to be in that yeshiva for the many good years of elementary. I think back to 4th grade, and I remember my Rebbe, Rabbi Beryl Liner, Shlita, how much he put into us to be able to memorize what this week we're going to read as the Birkat Yaakov Avinu. As young boys. And it wasn't just in 4th grade. We started in 2nd grade and then in 3rd grade. 4th grade was the climax. And there were all types of incentives that those 28 psukim of Birkat Yaakov Avinu, where Yaakov Avinu is on his deathbed. And this is it, the end of the book of Bereshit. And he's about to bless his sons. And he's giving them their parting words for life, for history. And he starts with those incredible words, He'asfu v'agid alachem ma yikre b'aharit hayamim. Wow. Says Rashi, Bikesh Yaakov legalot et haketz. Yaakov Avinu was ready to reveal the coming of Mashiach. Could you imagine? This was such a climactic moment, such a tremendous moment in history. And then suddenly, the Shekhinah leaves him. And once the Shekhinah leaves him, he goes off to a different subject. And instead he comes now to bless his sons, to give the parting words as he leaves this world. Amazing. Very emotional, if you think about this for a moment. He starts with Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. He goes through Klal Yisrael. But he starts with these words, He'asfu. He'asfu, gather together. And what's interesting is the Baal HaTurim, and many say, that the reason why he used that word is that although maybe openly he wanted to reveal the coming of Mashiach and he wasn't able to, but still he gave us a remez. He still gave us a hint. Do you know when Mashiach is going to come? He'asfu. When Klal Yisrael comes together as a unit and unify. Because it's the unity that makes us, and it's the disunity or the lack of unity that breaks us. And the entire story of Yosef and his brothers is a story of a Klal Yisrael ununified to become a Klal Yisrael that was only later on finally unified. And even in Egypt, and we're in a galut, and it's the beginning of the galut of Mitzrayim, but we're unified. And because of that, we still had Hashrat Shekhinah. We still had Yaakov Avinu. We still had the Gadol Hador. Because we had unity. And when Klal Yisrael has unity, we're untouchable. We make our own bed. You should know that. This is true not just on a Klal Yisrael level. This is also true on a family level, on an individual level. So many families are blessed, and in those blessed families you find unity. And so many families just can't get along. And sometimes they wonder to themselves, why are they going through the things they're going through? So this isn't just a skeleton key to the bringing of Mashiach. If only you guys can come together. If only there can be an achdut. If people would stop looking at the differences amongst Jews, amongst brothers, amongst family members, amongst sisters, amongst friends, amongst schools, amongst kihilot, amongst the color kippah you wear, or maybe no kippah at all. Or what's your last name? What passport do you carry in your back pocket? If these things wouldn't be such a big thing, and we could put it aside and find a certain ahadut in Klal Yisrael, this is the last step to the Geula. He'asvu, because if you do so, then, agida lachem, ma yikre ba'acharit hayamim. And this is a big opening idea. And generally I start every class with a sha'akol. But tonight I was so excited to tell you this point, because I think it's so important to go over this point again and again. If we could only get neighbors to get along, if we could only get family members to come together and to get along. And if you want, you can do it for the team. Do it for Klal Yisrael. If it's not enough to have harmony in your own family or in your own backyard, at least do it for us. Because as long as there is a lack of unity, Klal Yisrael is still missing that last step to bring the Geula. And today, look around. Boy, do we need it more than ever. Boy, do we need the unity more than ever. And it's funny, a corona comes and it hits us. And suddenly when Klal Yisrael, their backs are to the wall, we become supermen, we become heroes, we become incredible people. We're out there helping and doing like never before. And suddenly all those walls between us come crashing down. You know why? Because all the shuls were closed. All the schools were closed. All the identity status quos were closed. There's no such thing as, I don't pray in that shul. I don't send my kid to that school. There were no schools. There were no shuls. There was just the people that were yearning for help and each other. That moment, all those walls were brought down, and somehow or other we came together as one cohesive force. Unbelievable. If you watch Klal Yisrael, it hurts to say that sometimes in Sarot, I don't want to say it, God forbid, but sometimes that's the glue. It's the glue that brings us together and holds us together. Why does it have to be Sarot? Why can't it be out of Ahava? Why can't it be out of love? He'asvu v'agida lachem ma yikre b'acharit hayamim. You'll see in the end of days, the last thing that it's all going to come down to is your unity coming together. Now, when you think about this for a minute, you take a look at the Birkat Yaakov Avinu, the blessings that Yaakov gives his sons right before he passes away. This is his parting words to each one of the Shivtei Ka. But then when you take a closer look, are they really blessings? Are they? I mean, Reuven gets shambled. And if you think that's something, wait till you see what happens to Shimon and Levi. Reuven, Bechori ata. Would you believe that in 4th grade, in 3rd grade, I had this memorized? From the first pasuk, 28 psukim later to the last. But not just the psukim, with the translation in English and in Yiddish, and all the Rashis spoken out in a sing-song, all in Yiddish. A little Sfaradi boy. You believe that? The Rebbe had an incentive. He said, any boy that memorizes the Birkat Yaakov Avinu, with all the sheets, with all the Midrashim, with all the Rashis, with all the sing-song from beginning to end, they'll be zocheh, to be taken to meet the Bluzhever Rebbe Zechet Tzadik Lebracha in Borough Park. Again, that was when I was in 4th grade. You understand how many years ago. The Bluzhever Rebbe was still alive. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was one of the Tzaddikei Hador, hands down. One of the great Tzaddikim of the generation. He lived in Borough Park. And that was the incentive, that the entire class would be taken to the Bluzhever Rebbe, and the Bluzhever Rebbe will faher us. He'll test us on the Birkat Yaakov Avinu. Or the way they called it in Yeshiva, the Birchas Yaakov. In the Birkat Yaakov Avinu, he's going to give us the test. I said to myself, as a little boy, I was always fascinated with these great rabbis. You know, that Art Scroll book on the Arizal when I was a kid, I must have read it 19 times. There wasn't too many books at that time of the same type. But that one was so unique. I read it again and again and again. And then I used to read Rabbi Yosef Cairo. So when I heard that we can go to this great tzaddik, Holocaust survivor, Bluzhever Rebbe, a rabbi that many miracles were said over about his stay through World War II and the Holocaust and coming to the United States. I remember for the next week, I was glued to those sheets. I memorized them right side up and upside down, with the tune, with the song, in English, in Yiddish, back and forth. I don't know if I knew what I was saying, but I memorized again and again and again. And I had my mother test me, and I had my mother test me, and we went over it again and again and again until I knew it. And then I came to Yeshiva at the end of the week, and the rabbi in the classroom is going to see, okay, who's the finalists? Who's going to get to go to the great tzaddik, the Bluzhever Rebbe? And he lined us up in the back of the classroom. And he went around, okay, you start Reuven. Okay, stop, you continue, Shimon v'Levi. Stop, you continue, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zebulun. And he went around the class until he went around again and again and again. Excuse me, and the guys that really knew it well, he pulled to the front of the room. Those are the finalists. And there was a nice group. I remember it was about 12, 15 boys. And Baruch Hashem, I was lucky enough to make it to that final group. I knew it inside out. I know what I was saying, but I knew it inside out. And I remember that day I go home and I tell my father, Abba, we're going to the Bluzhever Rebbe. And he was like, wow. He said, Tzadikei Hador. Wow. How? What? I said, wow, I memorized it, Birkat Yaakov Avinu. He said, really? Friday night, he made me say it over by the table. And then the next week, the class needed a few fathers to come along as chaperones, just to help the Rebbe, you know. So I said, Abba, please, could you? And he says, okay, I'll come. And I remember one of those great memories I have with my father, Shem Shegivim Arichut Yamim Shanim Ad 120, is that he came down to Yeshiva, him and one other father with my Rebbe, and we all, that whole section of the class that was going, we all got into car services. You know, in the olden days, car services, there was no Uber. And we went out to the Bluzhever Rebbe. And I remember walking in and I saw those magnificent, silver, white, perfectly curled peot as he had it. And his face was so radiant. As a little boy, do you know what type of an impression that made on me? To look at this great tzaddik. My knees were shaking. I was so nervous. Because he has a little boy, you know, he's standing in front of a big rabbi, and he's about to test you. And you're like, you don't even remember your own name at that point. Baruch Hashem, Hashem had mercy on Duvi ben Shusha, I'm telling you. He asked me to say over Shimon v'Levi, which was basically in the earlier beginning parts of the Birkat Yaakov Avinu, which generally in these type of things, the beginnings most people know. It's the further later on portions that the real sharp kids had under their belt, you know. But he started with one kid, and he said, Reuven, Bechori ata, Reshit oni, Yeter se'et, v'yeter az. Unbelievable. And he sang it with a beautiful tune. And then he turned to me, Shimon v'Levi, and I started laughing. I'm a Levi. Shimon v'Levi. And I said it, Shimon v'Levi achim. Klei chamas mecherutehem. Arur apam ki az. And he looked at me. And he smiled, the Blizher Rebbe. And he looks at my Rebbe and he says, V'hester, well, what's his name? He said, Ben Shushan. A Sfaradi Shavacha, he says, a Sfaradi boy. A Sfaradi boy. He was so impressed that it was said over in Yiddish, in a real literature, real, genuine Litvish Yiddish. He was like, wow. He gave me a special bracha. He was impressed. I turned around at my father. My father was beaming. That's one of the beautiful memories I have of my father. And that's why every year, when we come around to this parashat Vayechi, and we come to the Aliyah of Revi'i, which is the Birkat Yaakov Avinu, Vayikra Yaakov el Banav, He'asvu v'agid alachem. This, and he starts giving the blessings. I start to watch it in my mind as a little boy all over again, as I could see. The Rebbe's no longer alive, but I could see literally that scene and those memories. It's amazing what Girsa Diyankuta does to a person. Girsa Diyankuta, that means the learning you did when you were very, very young. It stays with you, the Gemara says, like something that was written on a clean sheet of paper. But if you wait until you start learning much later on in life, says the Gemara, that already is more like someone who writes something on a paper with all types of etchings and erasings and scratch outs. How would you call that? Cross outs, where it's not clear. The information is not as clear as something on a clean, young, pure paper. It's amazing what we picked up when we were kids, and the Kiddushah that we picked up when we were kids, and the rabbis and the memories we picked up when we were kids, and what that did for us later on in life, at times that we never expected those amazing moments to come back to us, and to pull us out of situations, and to give us chizuk in dark moments. I'm talking about moments when you were in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. Who would ever think that ever would come back to be recycled later on in adulthood? And yet, you wouldn't believe how pure those moments carry us, even years later in life. And therefore, when it comes to finding a yeshiva for your kid, go for the best. Don't settle. Go for the place that's going to put into your child real Yirat Shamayim. That they're going to make the Chumash come alive. I had another Rebbe in Tiferes Elimelech, Rabbi Rubenstein. He also no longer is here. Zechet Tzadik Libracha. But when I remember when he used to teach Kriyat Yam Suf, he took the entire class into the dining room and he split the class up in half. And he took the buckets of water that they had in the washing stations of the dining room, of the lunchroom, of the yeshiva, and he would pour water, big puddles of water on the floor. He would put a big puddle on the right, and he put a big puddle on the left, and he would grab the groups of boys, and he would scream, "Come on, boys! We're going across the Yam Suf! Hashem split the water for us!" Do you know how old I was at that time? I don't think I was older than 6 or 7 years old. Do you know that I don't have too many other memories of me as 6 or 7 years old other than this one? But they made it so animated, they made it so alive and so passionate and so real and so surreal that how could you forget it? I remember as a kid dancing in between the puddles of water in the school lunchroom. And the Rebbe was dancing. He was dancing and singing. Az Yashir, Mamish, it was like you could hear the tambourine of Miriam in the background. How he made it alive. Made it alive. And that's my opening for this week's parasha. Parashat Vayechi is always going to be a special parasha to me because it meant so much to me as a kid. It'll remain with me so long as an adult until Aharit Hayamim. Kedarkenu bakodesh, Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech haolam, Shehakol nihiya bidvaro. So now let's come back to that point. Birkat Yaakov Avinu. But are there really birachot? Reuven, he starts with his oldest. Bechori ata, kochi v'reshet oni. Reuven, you were supposed to have everything. You were supposed to get kehuna. You were supposed to get melucha. You were supposed to have the kings. You were supposed to have everything. But pachas kamayim. Altotar. You went quick. You didn't think. You were impetuous. Ki alita mishkeve avicha. You went and switched your father's bed. You took it out of the tent of Bilhah. You brought it to your mother's tent. Says Yaakov Avinu, Reuven, you were too impetuous. You acted way too quick. You should have thought first. And because of that, you lose it all. You lose the kehuna. You lose the melucha. You call this Birkat Yaakov Avinu? Bueno, where's the beracha? Where's the beracha? Wait, we're just getting warmed up. Shimon v'Levi Achim, comes the next set of brothers. Oy, oy, oy. Klei Chamas Mecherutehem. He calls them Klei Chamas Mecherutehem. You know what that, I don't want to say what that really means. It means that you guys are you're killers. I mean, that's what he's saying. You took the art of Esav. You went out and killed an entire city, and you didn't tell me. Arur apam. Cursed is your anger. You have an anger issue. We need to split you up. We got to split you guys apart. Because when you're together, talking about fireworks, too many fireworks. Not just tonight, too many fireworks. We got to keep these brothers apart. Because together, take a look. Where's the beracha? He pounded them. Arur, he uses a word, arur apam. To the extent that Rashi insinuates, and the Midrash writes, that when the next brother was walking up for his turn, Yehuda, instead of walking forward, he started walking backwards. Wait. Yehuda started expecting the worst. He called out Reuven for trading the beds. He called out Shimon and Levi for Shechem, for Yosef. Oh, he's going to call me out for Tamar. He's going to call me out for Yosef. He's going to call me out, and Yehuda starts thinking of all those very delicate situations that one goes through in life. Always looking back and questioning, did I do the right thing? Says Yaakov Avinu, no, Yehuda, Ata yoducha achecha. You're different. All your brothers agree and modeh that you are special. You're a young cub, a crouching lion. You've shown leadership. You've shown power. You've shown stability. At the times that we needed it the most, you were able to stand up to Yosef. Wow, that's not simple. Stand up to Yosef, the viceroy of Egypt, Yosef HaTzadik. But you were able to stand up to him, even to almost put him in his place. Says Yaakov Avinu, the future of the kings are coming from you. Ah, we got a blessing. Wake up, everybody. We got a blessing. Finally, the Birkat Yaakov Avinu, and we found a beracha. Found a beracha. But it's amazing. If you take a look at all the brothers, you'll see that some brothers get blessings, other brothers don't. Some brothers don't get blessings, but it sounds a little bit like prophecies. Prophecies. You know, God, you're going to be a great warrior. Dan, you're going to be this incredibly lethal warrior, like a snake that ambushes his enemy from the ankle, from the sides of the road. And then, amen. Asher shemena lachmo. Some he gives blessings. Some he tells them the prophecy of their future. Others he gives musar and tochecha, like big tar. What's going on here? And yet this is known as Birkat Yaakov Avinu. This is an incredible thought. Not everybody got birachot. And even those who didn't get the musar, but some of them didn't get birachot either. They just got words of prophecy. Zevulun, you're gonna live by the water. Chazak u'baruch. Yisachar, chamor garem. Oh, there might be a blessing, Rashi says. That was to allude to the future Talmidei Chachamim that are going to come out from Yisachar. Okay. But there's such a difference in the way each son was dealt with on the last moments, on the deathbed of Yaakov Avinu. What is the common theme that brings all these last moments with all sons together? Is there a common theme? Many of the Rishonim struggle to find the common theme. Some wanted to say that this was not meant to be berachot. Some wanted to say that this was meant to be only words of prophecy for later on. But how does that work with Reuven? How does that work with Shimon and Levi? Some wanted to say it was really berachot. Take a look at Yehuda, take a look at Asher. But then it doesn't work out with Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. There's no berachot there. Some wanted to say it was words of advice, like by Zevulun. You should live by the water because that's the place that you're going to thrive. But how does that work out with all the other brothers? It's interesting. Some brothers he gave advice. Some brothers, Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, he told them their future of prophecy. Some brothers he gave musar, and some brothers he gave berachot. Why, to who, to which, to where, to why? How does this whole scheme come under the great one umbrella of Birkat Yaakov Avinu? Is there one congruent Sad Hashaveh, one congruent theme, common denominator, that will bring together what Yaakov Avinu's mission was with all these sons at the last moments of his life? So I heard from Rabbi Gladstein a beautiful idea. And he says this in the name of the Abarbanel. He says this question was bothering the Abarbanel very much. We all remember who the Abarbanel was. The Abarbanel lived in the time of the Spanish Inquisition. The Abarbanel was in the 1400s in Spain. He actually was very close to the king and the queen, King Ferdinand, Queen Isabella, to the extent that the very next morning, after they no longer needed the Jewish money and funds in order to carry the Spanish war, which later on they won thanks to Jewish money. And now they became a superpower in the world because of us, because of our backing. The next morning, after they didn't need us anymore, the morning after they won the war, they signed the Spanish Inquisition into law. That was their thank you to the Jews of Spain. That was their thank you. You know, either you convert or you get expelled And if you're caught as a Marano, you're burnt by the stake. We all know the stories. The Abarbanel was the one who got up in the royal court in front of the king and the queen. And he said to him, today Spain is a superpower. But because of what you're doing now to the Jews, tomorrow the world is going to say, Spain? Spain who? Hashem is going to bring you down to the dust of the earth. You're going to become a nothing nation. A very, and literally you see, it was words of prophecy. This was the famous Don Abarbanel, the great Abarbanel. The Abarbanel writes that there's this incredible common denominator that goes through all of Birkat Yaakov Avinu to his sons. And listen the way he sizes this up. And this is something beautiful. Listen to this. And before I give you this answer, I just want to touch upon something that I heard many years ago. And this is a question that many ask. Yaakov Avinu is coming down with his family to Egypt. What does Yaakov Avinu do? He sends one of his sons ahead to build a yeshiva in Goshen, so that when the family comes down, there'll already be a yeshiva built, the first yeshiva in Egypt, waiting for Yaakov Ubanav to settle in the city of Goshen. Now they have a yeshiva to attend to, because without a yeshiva, where's life? It's amazing. From all the sons to send, who did he send ahead? Yehuda. And the obvious question is, why Yehuda? You know, the Galut of Mitzrayim is about to start. And all the brothers and the tribes are all going to enter slavery except one, Levi. Levi, for the next 210 years, is going to be the ongoing kollel in Egypt. They're going to be learning all day, because this shevet wasn't part of the slavery. They were sitting and learning Torah in Egypt for the next 210 years. I would think that if you're going to send somebody down to set up the yeshiva, you'd send down the one that's going to end up using it? No? Wouldn't you send Levi? You want to send the powerhouse? Send Shimon. He wiped out a half a city. One guy. You want someone with responsibility? Send Reuven. He's the Bechor. He carries the responsibility of his father. You want to send Talmidei Chachamim? Send Yisachar. From Yisachar is going to come all the future poskim and Talmidei Chachamim of Klal Yisrael. Why Yehuda? Why Yehuda? So there are many wonderful answers to this question. This is a famous question. I heard an answer from Reb Shmuel Birnbaum, Zechet Tzadik L'Bracha, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir, where he said, from here you see, Yaakov Avinu teaches us an incredible lesson, that if you want to go out and build Torah, you need to build it with a gibor. You need to be a gibor, he used to say, in order to build Torah. Because there's so much to fight against. You see, the Yetzer Hara, when it comes to chesed, he lets things go. When it comes to davening, he'll drive you crazy a little bit. But once you get it under your belt, and it's your routine, you get it going, he leaves you alone. But there's one thing that the Yetzer Hara never lets go. And that is Torah. Because that's his kryptonite. That's his weakness. And you'll see, Abraham Avinu, after the Akedah, he had a good life. Yitzchak Avinu, after the Akedah, more or less had a good life. But Yaakov Avinu, from day one to the last moment of his life, it was one challenge after the next, right to the grave, even by the grave. Who was waiting for him? Esav. Stopping the burial procession. Saying, no, you're not burying him here. You're not taking my spot in Ma'arat HaMachpelah. No way. I'm the Bechor. They had to send Naphtali, the quickest runner, back down to Egypt to go get the star, to bring back, to show Esav that it's not his right to be buried in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, but it's Yaakov Avinu. So the last minutes of his life, he's already still in the challenge. Lavan, Esav, the tragedy of Dinah, the selling of Yosef. I mean, Because Yaakov Avinu was the pillar of Torah. And if you want Torah, you got to fight. You got to be a gibor. You got to be a warrior. The only way to build Torah is to literally be a gibor. And therefore, who did Yaakov Avinu send to open up the yeshiva? The biggest gibor on the staff. He sent Yehuda. For Shmuel Birnbaum. Beautiful pshat. And so true. Anyone out there that's building any Torah, I'm talking about even a Daf Yomi share, even anything, any type of share of learning, when you see what comes back at you, when you see what comes and constantly tries to throw you over and stop you, it's unbelievable the forces that work against you the minute you start to try to push or spread Torah and Klal Yisrael. The Maharsha also asks this question. Why did he send Yehuda? The Maharsha says that all the future poskim are going to be coming out of either Levi or Yisachar. But not Yehuda. So why did he send Yehuda? From all people to build the yeshiva? Answers the Maharsha something incredible. He says this was the moment that Yaakov Avinu was announcing to everybody that Yehuda is going to be the future kings of Israel. And says the Maharsha something amazing. The king has the last word. The king is Koveya. And if the king wants to paskin something, he has the power to do so. And if he wants to paskin something in Torah, he has the power to do so. He's not just a king, he's a posek, he's a Talmid Chacham. You have to read what the Gemara says in Berachot. David HaMelech is sitting on the throne. And what is he doing all day, says the Gemara? He's paskining Nida She'elot. He's looking at the Shvir, he's looking at the Shvil, he's looking at the Bidikot, trying to be matir, the wives, to go back in cleanliness to her husband. That's the job of a king? Yes. In Klal Yisrael? In Klal Yisrael? That's the job of a king. He's the example of greatness amongst Jews. And you can't be an example to greatness amongst Jews if you're not great in Torah. This is the all-around great Jew in all areas. And that was Yehuda. He was greatness in Torah, greatness in leadership, greatness in responsibility, and he was a gibor to prove it. He was stable, balanced, and focused. And he was able to obliterate his enemies. And by that, he was able to build Torah. Unbelievable. This is going to be the perfect segue to enter into this Abarbanel. Says the Abarbanel, guys, listen to this. He says, you want to know the real common denominator between what Yaakov Avinu was doing at the last moments of his life, when he called all his sons together to gather around, what we call Birkat Yaakov Avinu. He says, you know what he was doing? He was about to announce who the future of the kings of Israel is going to come from. And he needed to go on a king search through son by son by son, explaining why each son and their characteristics are befitting or are not befitting to become a king. This is not a time that he's giving musar. This is not a time that he's giving berachot. This is not a time that he's giving prophecies. This is not a time that he's giving advice. Says the Abarbanel, I don't agree with all those opinions. I hold that Yaakov Avinu had one objective, one mission, and one theme. I need to announce in public, I need to ordain the future of the kings of Israel, and it needs to start now, because if I don't say it out in the open, later on there'll be all types of fights. So I'm going to clarify right now, like a father on the deathbed, giving over his last word in tzava. So there'll be no miscommunications. It'll be as clear as day who the leadership of the future of the Jewish people is going to be riding on. The kings of Israel. Because when you have real leadership, when you have proper leadership, you have strength in the people. And Klal Yisrael over the years have always shown that when our leadership was strong, we were strong. And the leadership was weak, the people tend to start slipping away. And little by little, they end up slowing down their religious observance. And there's no one there with strength in the cuff to keep them. Says Yaakov Avinu, I need to set up the kings now. So that later on, the Jewish people will always have a strength of leadership. So they'll always have someone to be able to look up to and will bring them continuously back to Hashem. Because by the Goyim, kingship is monarchy. By Klal Yisrael, kingship is an ambassador. He's simply an ambassador for Hashem. And if the king is strong, then he keeps bringing the people back to who he represents, to Borei Olam himself. And now let's take a look, says the Abarbanel. Reuven, you were supposed to be king. But you know what happened? Pachas kamayim. You were too impetuous. You jumped. You didn't think. You were too quick. You were trigger happy. You moved too fast without thinking through with a clarity before you reacted, before you did what you did. A king cannot be someone impetuous. A king is somebody that's well thought out, that's very clear, with a stable sense about them. That everything they do has a clear, clean plan and purpose. And even when things happen, and even when a strike needs to be made, but what did we say a few weeks ago? What did that general say? That revenge is a dish that's served cold. You don't just, no. You sit, you think, you strategize, and you work out every nook and cranny, every detail. That's a king. Says Yaakov Avinu to Reuven. Says Yaakov Avinu to Reuven, you are way too quick to react, too impetuous. You don't have the makings of a king. Shimon v'Levi, says Yaakov Avinu, arur apam. Your anger is too fierce. Your passion is too fire. We need to split you up in Israel. If a king were to react the way you reacted, where every time someone did something wrong, boom, you kill out the city. He says, what type of reign of kingship would that be? And therefore, Shimon v'Levi, you're great. And from you, like Rashi says, from Levi is going to come the Kohanim, because you need to be passionate for Avodat HaKodesh, to be a Kohen. And from Shimon is going to come the Mlamdei Tinokot Shel Bet Rabban, the Rebbes of Torah, of the young children, the purest children. Because those Rebbes, like I described in the beginning of the class, need to be passionate, they need to be invigorated, they need to be animated. Shimon, that's perfect for you. You'll be on top of the table, Shimon, teaching those boys Chumash and Gemara. That's the Rebbes I want. But that's not a king. That's not a king. And therefore, Shimon v'Levi, you don't have what it takes to be a king. Yehuda, ata yoducha achecha. All your brothers agree that you are the leader, the one for kingship. You're the young lion. You have a certain purity to you. But at the same time, with your stability, you have a strength of a crouching lion that's able to pounce and obliterate his enemy in no time. Yehuda, You have what it takes to be a true king in Klal Yisrael. Unbelievable. And then he continues, let's see, who else might be a candidate for king? Is this just Yehuda? Maybe this is somewhat of a take and give process. There might be someone else that also might meet the cuff. And sure enough, he goes on. God, a fine warrior, you'll be able to serve the king. Dan, you're a powerful man. Dan, you know how to obliterate your enemies. But look at the way you attack. You attack like a snake. You wait in ambush. That's not a king. A king is someone who tells you, you dare come at me, I will meet you on this hill at this and this time for a battle. And I will obliterate you. There's majesty, there's royalty, there is strength. There isn't this guerrilla warfare of ambushing someone from the ankle as they come down the road. That's done, but that's not the way of kings. And therefore, Dan, you're a powerful, powerful, powerful shevet. Dan was unbelievable warriors. Who's going to come from Dan? Shimshon HaGibor. But that's not a king. Naphtali, you're going to be an incredible, swift messenger. You'll be able to carry the royal messages, but not a king. Asher, Shemena Lachma. Oh, you're going to have bounty, and that which you put your hand to will succeed, and you'll be able to bake and make magnificent product. You'll be able to serve the king. But a king yourself, you're still in the service business. Each one, it's amazing. Till finally he comes to Yosef. Oh, Yosef, ben porat Yosef, ben porat ale ayin, benot tzada ale shor. Unbelievable. Says Yaakov Avinu, Yosef, you were the closest. From everybody, you were the closest to becoming king. But Yosef, there's a big difference between you and Yehuda. You see, part of the job in order to be a king is to be able to unify and bring together everybody. You need to be able to unify the kingdom. You need to be able to unify your subjects. And because your brothers felt so antagonized, to the extent that they brought, to the extent of their hatred, not the sale, big question if Yaakov Avinu ever knew about the sale. But the hatred was apparent. That was evident. If that's the case, you don't have the ability to be king. To be king, you need to be able to unite the people under one banner, one leadership, one idea. And by you, there was machloket. Amazing. And so too comes to Binyamin. He tells Binyamin as well, take a look. You will have kings from you. Shaul HaMelech, the first king of Israel, Binyamin, is going to come from you. But take a look at what happened with Shaul. He had a kingship with his own ideas in mind. And that's what happened with Agag. That's what happened with Amalek. That's not a king. A king is not an own idea. It's an ambassador of the representation of Hashem. And therefore, says the Abarbanel, he went through every single son and wasn't putting anyone down and wasn't putting anyone up. It was a process of finding the king amongst us. Because I need to do this right now before he passes. And sure enough, Yehuda, he's the king of Israel. Do you know that today, most of Klal Yisrael, what we know, comes be'etzem from only a few tribes. Many of the tribes of Israel are what they're called the lost tribes of Israel. Today, most of what we know, Klal Yisrael today, comes from Shevet Yehuda. Obviously, the Kohanim and Leviim come from Shevet Levi. And there's a few that come from Binyamin, from those kingdoms that were split before those tribes went into hiding. And what's amazing is that every Jew that comes from Yehuda, you need to understand this. The Abarbanel writes that he himself, the Abarbanel, comes from David HaMelech. That means that he came from Yehuda. The Abarbanel writes that if you take a very interesting survey and look and do the research, you'll find that over the years, most of the Gedolei Israel came from Shevet Yehuda. Most of these great men came from David HaMelech's line. Most of the Gedolim in Galut, all the Nasi, right? Rabban Gamliel, Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, they all came from the line of David. They all came from Shevet Yehuda. The Gedolim came from Yehuda. Because this was the amazing qualities that was put and given to Yehuda that will not leave his Shevet. Lo tasur Shevet mi Yehuda. This will not be taken, the scepter of kingship will not be taken away from Yehuda. It'll stay by his descendants until Biat HaGoel, until the end of time. I once traveled out to Tzfat. I went to visit an old great aunt of mine who was married to my grandmother's brother, who was responsible for helping my father, along with many of the boys in Morocco, to be able to come over to America at a very young age of 13 years old, to be able to make it to the Mir Yeshiva, and to grow up in the Mir Yeshiva at age 13. My father didn't see his family for over 15 years. He literally came over at bar mitzvah age and stayed here with a whole group of Moroccan boys until they were 23, 24 years old. When he was first engaged to my mother, he went back to Morocco just to visit his parents for the first time in almost 10 years. They did not see them. This uncle was responsible for having a hand in helping him in coming to the United States. This particular uncle, somebody very special. After he passed away, we went out to Tzfat to visit his widow, my father's aunt, or our great aunt. And I was amazed. I walked up in the Tzfat apartment and I saw on the wall, they had in a frame their Shtar Ketubah. The Ksuba was on the wall. But this Shtar Ketubah wasn't the square page as the way we see it. It was this long, long document that looked like a Megillah. It was actually rolled inside a glass. And then I started to realize, why did they write the Ketubah that long? It happens to be that the minhag then, in certain cities of Morocco, they would write in the Ketubah the lineage of the families that are getting married all the way back to some great rabbi that they went back to many years ago. So I'm looking at this document and it's going back. Because what was amazing is that they were both Ben Shushans from both sides, meaning two cousins married each other. So my great uncle and my great aunt were both Ben Shushans from both sides, two cousins marrying. And we watch as the lineage was very similar because it was the same family, and it went all the way back to the 1100s to a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Shushan. And over there it wrote, Rabbo Shel Haramba. I looked at my father. Wait 1 second. What does that mean? Come on. We know who the Rabbo Shel Harambam was. His father, Rabbi Maimon, for many years was the Rebbe of the Rambam. The Rimagash, the Rif was the Rebbe of his father, but the Rambam would call Rabbeinu Elfas, the Rif, his Rebbe as well, because he received the Torah of the Rif through his father to the Rambam in second hand. But I said, Abba, I never heard about this. He says to me, let me tell you the story that our family holds cherished to be very, very special to us. He says, when the Rambam and his father were expelled from Spain, so most of those Jews that were expelled, they went straight to North Africa. It was one of the closest points, right across the ocean. The first point you hit is North Africa. They all came to Morocco. That's why till today you have a portion of the country that's known as Spanish Morocco. In that part of the country, they only speak Spanish. The rest of the country, they speak French and Arabic, because the French, years later, occupied that portion of Morocco. He says, when the Rambam came to Morocco with his father, the Rambam later on, he was still young, he ended up writing the Igeret Hashmad in Morocco. That Igeret Hashmad was something unbelievable to read. What was going on those times. There was no shul that was allowed to be built taller than a mosque. And all the gezerot, little by little, got worse and worse and worse, to the extent that it came to a point where they stopped and closed the shuls completely. Anyone that was caught praying, davening in a minyan was killed. This was going on at the time that the Rambam was in Morocco. And at that time, the Rambam was very close with our great-great-grandfather, Rabbi Yehuda ben Shushan, which was the chief rabbi of the city. And they were very close, and they learned together. They learned together for years. One time, the Gzera came out that the Pasha, the head Arab, he decided right before the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, he's locking all the shuls. There is no minyanim, no public prayer. He's ending tefillot in shul complete. What are you going to do?
What will happen this year?
Right, well, it's under different circumstances. What are you going to do? Rosh Hashanah and Kippur? Well, Rosh Hashanah, the people decided that they're going to do a little makeshift here and there. But for Yom Kippur, what are they going to do? So the Rambam had an idea. He spread quietly through the town that they're making a candlestein, secret minyan, in one of the basements in the area, just for Yom Kippur. And no one is to speak about it. Like this, the Pasha doesn't find out. The Rambam approaches Rabbi Yehuda and he says to him, I want to make a minyan, clandestine minyan, secret minyan. No one will find out about it. Rabbi Yehuda says, I want you to make it in my basement. I want it to be in my house. I'll close the shutters. No one will know. The Rambam says, okay, they put out the word to everyone in the city that the minyan for Kippur is going to be in the basement of the chief rabbi. They locked up the doors, closed the shutters. There was no way of seeing or hearing or knowing anything on the outside. And sure enough, came Yom Kippur, Kal Nidre, they prayed at night. The next day, everybody came down to the basement. They started praying Shachrit. In middle of Musaf, in middle of the Avodat Kohanim, the doors to the basement break open. And in walks the Pasha with his army. And he's standing wielding a sword. And he looks and he sees how he caught everybody in the town red-handed. Every Jew, including the chief rabbi, everybody, the Rambam, they were all there. The Pasha looks at everyone and says, today is Yom Kippur. It's a day of forgiveness. It's a day of atonement. I will forgive and I will atone everyone in this minyan that's here praying, except for the one who arranged it. He needs to pay the price to show that I mean business. Who arranged this minyan? Just then, Reb Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, stands up. He was about to open his mouth to scream, it was I. And Reb Yehuda ben Shushan jumps up and says, Pasha, what type of foolish question is that? I'm the chief rabbi of this city, and it's here in my basement. Who do you think arranged this minyan? The Pasha walked up and grabbed Rabbi Yehuda, and in front of the entire Kehillah, he decapitated him. Killed him on Yom Kippur, on the spot. He died al Yidei Kiddush Hashem. And he also saved the Rambam. Legend has it that after this story, the Rambam was so broken that he lost a contemporary, his Rebbe to an extent, his Chavrusa, that the Rambam, this was one of the final steps that he said, I'm leaving. I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. He went to Israel, then after that to Egypt. We all know the rest of the Rambam's history. But legend has it, and that's what I saw in the Ketubah, legend has it that the Rambam left over a daughter in Morocco, and she ended up marrying the son of Rabbi Yehuda after his murder. And then the Rambam left, and he went to Israel, leaving a daughter behind. Amazing. Rabbi Yehuda says, and the Rambam says on both themselves, the Rambam says that he comes from David HaMelech. He comes from the line of Yehuda. It's amazing. The great ones came from Yehuda. Amazing. You see them Sirut Nefesh. But gentlemen, this is what I want to bring home to you. Now we appreciate, after the Abarbanels' magnificent pshat, what was it that Yaakov sent Yehuda to build the Yeshiva over everyone else? Because to build Torah, you need to be a king. But what does that mean? Says Yaakov Avinu, I'm now going to explain what it means. It means that you can't be impetuous like Reuven. You can't be a ka'asan like Shimon Velevi. You cannot be too much out there of a businessman like Zevulun. You can't be too much like this or too much like that. You need to be an all-encompassing gadol and gibor. That's why the kings and the leaders and many of the future gedolim are all going to come from Yehuda. Because in order to be a Torah builder, you need to be a king. This is the Rambam himself, the famous Rambam. The Rambam says in the last Rambam of Hilchot Shemitah v'Yovel, Lo Shevet Levi bilvad, not just the tribe of Levi, that they have a claim to the learning of Torah. Ela kol mi, anybody that wants to stand up and find himself a certain kingship of royalty will wear the crown of Torah. And that's why Torah is called Keter Torah. It's a crown. When you start learning Torah, you become a king, because it makes you less impetuous. It makes you less of a ka'asan. It makes you less of a worldly man. It makes you less of a person that brings machloket. It refines you. It purifies you. It gives you royal blood. And when you meet Gedolim, you see in front of you such royalty. You ever stand in front of Reb Chaim Kanievsky Shalita on Me'av Esrim? I remember that first time. I went to see Reb Chaim Kanievsky many years ago. I went in with a guy by the name of Nassan Yafi, a great guy, a super powerhouse, the head of Kupat Ha'ir in Bnei Brak. And he said to me, Rabbi Duvi, I'm going to take you into Reb Chaim Kanievsky because you speak by our Chinese auctions. I'm going to take you into Reb Chaim when you come to Israel. So when I came to Israel, I grabbed in on that favor. And he brought me into Reb Chaim. But before we went in, he did something so smart. He says, is this your first time meeting Reb Chaim? I said, yeah. The first time in person? I said, yeah. He said, if that's the case, then we need a kfittel. I said, what do you mean? He says, we need a piece of paper. Write down all the things you want to ask him. I said, so what does it make a difference if it's my first time, my second time, or my third time? If the way you go into the rabbi is by writing down a kvittel, then that's what you do. I mean, many Gedolim, they do that. He says, no. You don't get it, do you? He says, I've walked many people into Reb Chaim, and the first time they walk in, they're, and you totally forget what you want to say. I said, nah. He says, I'm telling you, listen to me. I said, okay. We took a piece of paper, I wrote down all the things I wanted to ask, and then he walked me into Reb Chaim's study. And guys, I want to tell you something. Kishemesh hazorachat me'achareh hatzarayim. I walked in that first time. Reb Chaim was shining. I was, I forgot my own name. Forget about all the things I wanted. Even the piece of paper I was holding, Yafi had to pry it out from my fingers, and put it down on Reb Chaim's table in order for me to get the berachot that I came. Because I was just hamana. Wow. I'm standing in front of Gadol Hador. And you feel the vibes. And you feel the royalty. I'm standing in front of the kings of Israel of our generation. He's wearing the crown of Torah. He is king. And that's what it means. We live by the words of our Gedolim. Because they're not just the Gadol, they're the kings of our generation. And their word is the only word. We should be zocheh to have banim ubnei banim, melachim ubnei melachim, so that finally we can meet the descendant of Yehuda and David HaMelech, the one that we're really waiting for, Mashiach Tzidkenu. Thank you for listening, guys.